Dan and Amy and Ed Whalen, he's the president of the Ethics and Public Policy Center, former Justice Scalia law clerk. And we'll talk to David French at the bottom of the hour about him as well because he writes for NRO. We talked to Noah Rothman in the 7 o'clock hour about this string of tweets that he posted yesterday, sort of in criminal defense attorney fashion, presenting an alternative theory of who the potential abuser of Blasey Ford was back 36 years ago by presenting a classmate of Kavanaugh's who looked like him.
In a split screen.
A split screen, and then like the distance between the houses of the parties named and his house, and then a floor plan of his house to compare that to the description of the house that Blasey Ford has. And he said, I'm not pointing the finger at anybody else. I'm just raising this as a possible, under the possible theory of mistaken identity. Well, I mean, you can't point to somebody and say it could have been him and then say, but I'm not saying it could have been him.
Yeah, defamation of character on line 1.
Well, maybe, but
you'd be mad if that was your picture.
Well, I understand mad versus defamation. He made it was a terrible idea. I just can't understand why he thought this was
legal,
made any sense. Ed Whalen now tweeting this morning, just a few moments ago, I made an appalling and inexcusable mistake of judgment in posting the tweet thread in a way that identified Kavanaugh as Georgetown prep classmate. I take full responsibility for that mistake, and I deeply apologize for it. I realize that does not undo the mistake. It's an appropriate apology. It's just a stunning error in judgment from somebody who is a serious, thoughtful, intelligent guy. But I don't know. This is sort of where our politics are. You have otherwise well-adjusted, smart people not always behaving consistent with that description. For more on the topic of Kavanaugh, also this Bloomberg story about tax cuts, we're pleased to be joined by our friend Michael Barone, senior political analyst for the Washington Examiner, WashingtonExaminer.com. Michael, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, nice to be with you.
What do you think about that whole Ed Whalen flap and just that bizarre Twitter thread that he posted?
Well, I was astonished that he named an individual as a possible perpetrator of a possible attack. I thought that was sort of astonishing and unprofessional and a wrong thing to do. I think there's room to introduce the idea, which some people did, just in the abstract, that an accuser could be mistaken about an identity of an attacker, assuming that an attack did occur, that occurred 36 years ago and in circumstances where perceptions may be hazy and so forth. That's perfectly plausible, but he ran down a floor plan in a particular house in Chevy Chase. I don't think you really need to do that. The fact is that the description sheet could comport with many floor plans, and people obviously realize that. And naming names is inappropriate. I known and liked Ed Whalen, and I was pretty astonished that he named the name. And strikes me, Amy's got a point. The guy wants a defamation lawsuit. If the guy wants to bring a lawsuit, I don't think it would be thrown out of court.
No, it wouldn't be thrown out. It wouldn't necessarily. Anyway.
So what do you think of?
I'm not going to name the name, but
no. But what do you think of her list of demands, or her attorney's list of demands that they gave the committee yesterday?
Well, I think that the demand that the Red Queen preside over the questioning is probably going a little far. I'm just making a weak joke there, but the demand that Judge Kavanaugh testify first and not respond to her testimony. I think that's sort of the committee's business about who testifies before their committee, and I don't think that. If you're truth-seeking, I don't think that those are particularly appropriate demands, and I would think the committee would not go along with them, but we shall see. I've not been a perfect prognosticator of everything that's been going on here, But the committee has indicated a willingness to allow this person to testify in public or in private, in Washington or in California or presumably in another location if they want to. That's and the various terms and conditions which these people have insisted upon and their unwillingness immediately to testify and so forth suggests that this very well could be a partisan setup. We don't know that for sure, but it's certainly possible.
If she does testify, and for whatever reason it goes badly, not for her but for Kavanaugh, and somehow this nomination is derailed, what do you think the political implications would be for November 6th?
The such initial polling as we've seen, and going back to the polling in 1991 when the nomination of Clarence Thomas was challenged and Anita Hill testified, although remember she testified, he never touched her. According to her testimony, that suggests that the judge might actually be helped and might not be rallying people to his side, people who believe that the kind of jurisprudence which he has advocated and which he's practiced on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals is the kind of jurisprudence they'd like to see on the Supreme Court. So I think it could be positive for Judge Kavanaugh, positive for the Republicans, but we shall see. I think that if Judge Kavanaugh's nomination is withdrawn, which I don't expect to have happen, but if it is, I think my prediction next nominee will be a woman.
Just sticking on the topic of Republicans' political fortunes and messaging, this RNC survey that Bloomberg reported on yesterday, by a 2-to-1 margin, respondents said the Trump tax cuts, benefit large corporations and rich Americans over middle-class families. The Trump tax cuts, despite a strong economy, in part buoyed by those tax cuts, one would argue, it's basically evenly split between Americans, 44% favor, 45% oppose. Even in an RNC report, voters are evenly divided on the Tax Cuts and Job Acts, but we've lost the messaging battle on this issue. What should Republicans take away from, according to the RNC's pollster, losing the messaging battle on tax cuts?
Well, when you're doing messaging battles, it's not helpful if the president is tweeting about other extraneous and irrelevant issues, about whether or not the estimates of the death toll in Puerto Rico and the hurricane were accurate or believable. I think he actually had a point on the substance, but that was a long ago issue, and it's distracting attention. They have a strong case to make that the tax cuts have benefited the economy. There's certainly a perception that the economy is in better shape than it's been in the last, not just 10 years, but the last 15, this whole century, going from the year 2000. I think Republicans could do a better job. Of course, mainstream media will do everything they can to obstruct the Republicans from delivering a message and, presenting counter arguments or avoiding the subject. So, it's always a little uphill for Republicans, but the Constitution guarantees us a free press, not a fair one.
And we woke up this morning with great news. Jobless claims are the lowest since 1969, and there's 7 million job openings right out there in America, and that's great news.
I think one of the things that's very interesting is the accumulating evidence that increases in the economic growth and positive economic signs tend to be benefiting people in the modest, middle, and lower end of the income and skill spectrum, contrary to the trends that have prevailed for at least the last 20 years, where income gains have gone especially to people at the high end of the income and skills scale. Donald Trump campaigned as somebody that was going to help the ordinary guy and gal get ahead, and people without a lot of marketable skills help them do better. that seems to be happening now. Whether it's a result of his policies or has no connection with, you can argue about that all night. But I think it's a very interesting set of trends. Just talking to a liberal Democratic analyst about this yesterday, and basically who agreed with the summary that I've just given you. He adds that we don't know if this is, just a short-term statistical noise, or is it going to be a long-term statistical trend? But if it turns out to be a long-term statistical trend, and it could, that is a change in our economy that probably is a political asset to Republicans, particularly as their coalition of voters has become more downscale and less dependent on high-income people. It's an interesting change if that's what we're watching occur.
All right. He is Michael Barone, senior political analyst for the Washington Examiner, WashingtonExaminer.com. Michael, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for being here.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.